All right, so get this. We're diving into Thailand's economy today.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I was looking at some articles about their financial situation,
All
and,
right.
and it's kind of a head scratcher.
Really? How so?
Well, they missed their revenue target, but somehow there's no budget deficit.
Huh.
Yeah, and on top of that, the baht is strong.
So things are good, right?
Well, that's what we're trying to figure out. We've got some Thai news articles and some expert analysis to dig through.
Okay, sounds good.
So let's see if we can make sense of what's going on and, what it all means for Thailand's future.
All right, let's do it.
Okay, first up, Bangkok Biz News. Thailand missed its revenue collection goal for fiscal year 2024 by 4 to 5 billion baht.
Wow, that's a lot of baht.
Yeah, it is. But here's the kicker. The permanent secretary of the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Lawan Sangsanet, insists this won't result in a larger budget deficit.
Wait, how's that possible?
Exactly. That's what I thought.
I mean, if they're not bringing in as much money, shouldn't that lead to a bigger deficit?
Right. Well, it seems like it comes down to spending. Spending?
Yeah, government spending in other areas has also been lower than projected.
Oh, so they're basically tightening their belts in other places to make up for the lost revenue.
Exactly. It really highlights how interconnected everything is within a national budget.
Yeah, it's not just about how much money you bring in, it's also about how you manage what you spend.
It's a balancing act. If one side dips, the other has to adjust.
Makes sense.
Now, the article blames the strong baht for the revenue shortfall.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize there was a connection there.
So how does a strong currency impact revenue?
Well, it can have a significant effect, specifically when it comes to VAT on imports.
Okay, remind me how that works.
Sure. So a strong baht makes imported goods cheaper, right?
Right, because you can buy more with your baht.
Exactly. So that's good for Thai consumers, but it means less VAT is collected.
Oh, because the tax is a percentage of the price.
Right. A lower price means less tax collected.
That's a fascinating point. A strong baht could actually be bad for the government's bottom line.
It can definitely create some challenges. Now, to get a deeper perspective, we've also been looking at analysis from Dr. Kitti Limsakul.
Oh, I've heard of him.
He's a really well-respected economist and professor at Chulalongkorn University,
Okay.
and he also co-founded the Thai Rak Thai Party.
Interesting. So he's got both these academic and political background?
Exactly. And his analysis goes beyond just the headlines. He's looking at the bigger economic picture.
So where's he getting this information from?
We've been looking at both his Facebook posts and his Wikipedia page.
Okay. So a mix of current thoughts and background info.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what's Dr. Limsakul's take on all of this?
Well, he argues that this revenue shortfall wasn't totally unexpected, given the current economic climate and the policies that have been in place.
Okay.
And he uses the concept of aggregate demand and supply to explain his thinking.
Aggregate demand and supply. I think we could use a little refresher on that.
Sure, no problem.
Could you break it down for us?
Basically, aggregate demand is the total demand for all the goods and services in the economy, and aggregate supply is, well, the total supply of all those goods and services.
Okay, that makes sense.
So Dr. Limsakul's point is that when demand is higher than supply, you get inflation.
Right. Prices go up.
Exactly. But Thailand is experiencing very low inflation right now, even facing deflationary risks.
Deflationary risks? I mean, isn't that a good thing? Aren't lower prices good for consumers?
It might seem that way at first, but deflation can actually be a sign of a weak economy.
Oh, how so?
It means people aren't spending enough businesses right now.
Yeah.
Might struggle jobs, could be at risk. It could be a real problem.
So the missing revenue, while not causing a deficit right now, could be a sign of something bigger.
Exactly. It's a potential warning sign that things might not be as healthy as they appear.
So it's like the canary in the coal mine.
Precisely.
So what does Dr. Limsakul suggest be done about all of this?
He's pretty critical of the Bank of Thailand's monetary policy, specifically their decision to maintain high interest rates.
Okay, and why is that a problem?
Well, high interest rates discourage borrowing and investment.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. If it costs more to borrow money, people are less likely to take out loans.
Exactly. And that can lead to less spending, less investment, and ultimately slower economic growth.
So it's a vicious cycle. High interest rates make people hesitant to borrow, which weakens demand and contributes to low inflation and a sluggish economy.
Yeah, it's all connected.
Now, Dr. Limsakul sees this as a point of contention between the Ministry of Finance and the Bank of Thailand, right?
The ministry likely wants to stimulate the economy, while the bank is focused on controlling inflation through those high interest rates.
So they have different priorities and approaches to the same problem.
It seems that way.
And what else is Dr. Limsakul concerned about?
He's also critical of the Ministry of Finance's reliance on what he calls financial instruments to raise funds, instead of increasing the tax revenue to GDP ratio.
Okay, financial instruments. What are those exactly?
Things like issuing bonds or treasury bills. Basically, the government is borrowing money to cover its expenses.
Instead of finding ways to bring in more revenue through taxes.
Right, and Dr. Limsakul argues that this might work in the short term, but it's not a sustainable solution for the long haul.
So he's advocating for a more fundamental change in how Thailand manages its money.
Precisely, he believes that relying too heavily on borrowing can create bigger problems down the line.
It's like putting a Band-Aid on a deeper wound.
A good analogy.
So does he offer any solutions to these challenges?
Well, he emphasizes the need for coordinated action between the government and the Bank of Thailand.
They need to get on the same page.
Exactly, and work together strategically to address these economic issues.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, the Bangkok Biz News article mentions that the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Sangsanit, plans to meet with the Bank of Thailand to discuss the revenue shortfall.
Oh, interesting.
What do you think will come out of that meeting?
Well, I think it could be a crucial step toward finding some common ground.
So maybe they can start to align their strategies.
Hopefully, and come up with a more coordinated approach to address these challenges.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
But it's not just up to the government and the central bank, right?
Right.
What role do everyday citizens play in all of this?
Citizens have a huge role to play, staying informed about economic issues, engaging in constructive dialogue, holding their elected officials accountable.
Yeah.
These are all important.
So it's a team effort.
Absolutely. Everyone has a stake in shaping Thailand's economic future.
All right, let's dive back into Dr. Limsakul's analysis and unpack some of his specific critiques of the government's policies.
Sounds good.
What did he have to say about their decisions?
Well, one of his main points is about tax policies.
Okay.
He thinks the government hasn't done enough to increase the tax revenue to GDP ratio.
So instead of relying on those financial instruments?
Exactly. If they could increase that ratio, it would create a much more stable source of income.
Makes sense. It's like building a stronger foundation for the long term.
Right, and then they could use that money to invest in important areas like education or infrastructure.
Yeah, and even social programs, right?
Absolutely.
So are there any specific tax policies Dr. Limsakul thinks could be improved?
Yeah, he talks about the need for a more progressive tax system.
Okay, so higher earners contribute more.
Right, it's not only about generating more revenue, but also promoting greater income equality.
Oh, interesting. So it's about fairness, too.
Exactly, spreading the burden more evenly.
And potentially reducing income inequality.
Which could have a positive ripple effect throughout the entire economy.
It's like that saying, a rising tide lifts all boats.
Exactly, and he also suggests closing tax loopholes.
Ah, yes. Those loopholes that allow some corporations and wealthy individuals to avoid paying their fair share.
Right, he wants to see a more equitable and efficient system where everyone contributes fairly.
So it's about creating a system that benefits everyone, not just a select few.
Right, and he believes that would be a powerful way to promote both economic growth and social well-being.
It makes you wonder if there's any political will to actually implement those kinds of reforms.
That's a good question, one for the political analysts, I guess.
True, but it highlights an important point. Addressing economic problems sometimes means looking beyond just the numbers.
Yeah, we have to consider the bigger picture.
Human element,
Exactly how these policies affect people's lives.
Okay, so back to that potential conflict between the Ministry of Finance and the Bank of Thailand.
Right.
How does this difference in approach impact the average person?
Well, if the ministry wants to stimulate the economy and the bank wants to keep interest rates high, it creates a lot of uncertainty.
And that makes it hard for people to plan for the future?
Exactly. Businesses might hesitate to invest if they're not sure what the economic landscape will look like.
And individuals might hold back on spending, too.
Right. It can impact everyone's confidence in the economy.
So this debate has real-world consequences.
Absolutely. It's not just an abstract discussion.
Okay, so how can they bridge this gap between the ministry and the bank?
Communication is key. They need to be talking to each other and working together.
Like a team.
Exactly. They need to have a unified strategy and send clear signals to the market.
So it's not just about making decisions, it's about making decisions together.
Right, and focusing on the long-term health of the economy.
It's a reminder that economic policy isn't just about crunching numbers, it's about people and relationships.
And finding solutions that work for everyone.
Now let's bring it back to our listeners for a moment.
Sure.
How might all of this impact their lives even if they're not directly involved in Thailand's economy?
Well, economies are all interconnected.
Right. What happens in one place can affect other places.
Exactly. It's like a ripple effect.
So if Thailand's economy weakens, it could impact demand for goods and services from other countries.
Right, which could affect global trade patterns.
So even if we're not living in Thailand, these global economic trends can influence our decisions.
Absolutely. Things like investments, travel, even our spending habits.
It's about having that global awareness.
Exactly, and understanding that these events might be closer to home than we think.
All right. I think we've done a good job unpacking Dr. Limsakul's analysis.
Yeah, I think so.
But before we wrap up, I want to touch on something else.
Okay.
Dr. Limsakul has a really interesting background.
Yeah, he's not just an economist.
Right. He was involved in politics. He co-founded the Thai Rak Thai Party.
It's unique to have that blend of experience.
It makes you wonder how his political background might influence his economic views.
For sure, it adds another layer to the analysis.
Like, does his experience with that party shape his ideas about government spending, for example?
It's definitely something to consider.
It's like we're not just looking at data and theories.
Right, there's a human element to it all.
Okay, so let's bring it back to our listeners one last time.
Okay.
What's the main takeaway from all of this?
I think the biggest takeaway is how interconnected everything is.
Currency fluctuations, government policy, individual choices, it all plays a role.
Exactly. It's like a giant web.
And understanding those connections helps us make better decisions.
Both in our own lives and as citizens.
So it's not just about Thailand's economy, it's about understanding the forces that shape the world.
Exactly.
All right, I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
Revenue shortfalls, the strong baht, those deflationary risks, and even that potential clash between the ministry and the bank.
We covered it all.
And we've really dug into Dr. Limsakul's analysis.
His critiques and proposed solutions.
But before we sign off, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought-provoking question. So given Thailand's current economic situation, what are the potential trade-offs between, short-term stability and long-term growth?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it?
It seems like policymakers everywhere are wrestling with that.
Yeah, it's a tough balancing act, for sure.
So how do you even approach that?
Well, on the one hand, you want stability, right? You want to keep things predictable and manageable in the short term.
Yeah, keep the ship steady.
Exactly. But then you also need to think about growth, investing in the future so the economy can thrive over the long haul.
So you've got these two competing priorities.
And finding that sweet spot where you can encourage growth without sacrificing stability or vice versa, that's the real challenge.
It's like walking a tightrope.
It is. You have to weigh those priorities, assess the risks, and make those tough choices.
No easy answers.
Nope, definitely not. And you need to be ready to adapt as things change.
Okay, so thinking about this stability versus growth dilemma, it brings us back to Dr. Limsakul's ideas.
Right.
He keeps pushing for that coordinated action between the government and the Bank of Thailand.
Yeah.
So what would that actually look like?
Well, it would require a lot of clear communication and a shared vision for the future.
So they'd have to be on the same page.
Exactly. It might mean compromising on interest rates, maybe gradually lowering them to try and stimulate growth, but at the same time, keeping a close watch on inflation.
Makes sense. So it's about finding that middle ground.
Right. And it could also involve implementing some of those tax reforms that Dr. Limsakul suggested.
To generate more revenue for the government. So essentially, it's about finding a path forward that acknowledges the need for stability right now, but also keeps an eye on those long-term growth goals.
Exactly. It's about balancing those short-term and long-term needs.
And it sounds like a lot depends on whether the government and the Bank of Thailand can actually work together.
It does. If they can present a united front and show that they're collaborating, it could really boost confidence in the market.
And that would encourage people to invest and spend.
Exactly.
So fingers crossed for that meeting between the ministry and the bank.
Yeah, let's hope they can make some progress.
All right. Well, I think we've really explored some interesting and complex ideas today.
We have.
We've talked about revenue shortfalls, the impact of the strong baht, those deflationary risks, and, of course, that potential conflict between the Ministry of Finance and the Bank of Thailand.
Yeah, we covered a lot of ground.
And we've really got into the weeds with Dr. Limsakul's analysis.
His critiques, his solutions.
And I think it's so fascinating that he has that background in both economics and politics.
Yeah, it definitely adds another layer to his perspective.
If you're interested in learning more about him and his work, I highly recommend checking out his publications on ResearchGate.
That's a great resource.
And his Wikipedia page is really interesting, too. You can learn more about his political career and his involvement with the Thai Rak Thai Party.
It's a good reminder that these economic theories and policies are shaped by real people.
with real experiences.
Exactly.
And, economics can seem really intimidating sometimes, all those numbers and charts.
It can be a lot.
But ultimately, it's about people, right?
Yeah.
It's about the choices we make and the systems that impact our lives.
And the more we understand those systems, the better equipped we are to make informed decisions.
Exactly. So stay curious, keep learning, and remember, even the most complex economic puzzles can be solved.
With a little effort and a lot of insightful conversation.
Couldn't said it better myself.
Yeah.
Well, that's all for today, folks. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Thailand's economic puzzle.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, happy exploring.